there's a ton of identity switching going on, and people lying and masking and pretending to be people that they're not. And then there's the meta relationship of this being a play within a play, which we'll talk about how that is set up. And my question that I want for us to circle back to as we go is like, does that change anything about the central message that this play seems to purport and how we should feel about it? Welcome, friends, to episode 336 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss William Shakespeare's 1592 play, The Taming of the Shrew. So here we are with our first quarterly project of the year. This was a Patreon selection. The Taming of the Shrew / 10 Things I Hate About You ended up beating out Shrek, Starship Troopers, and Akira. All three of those got lots of love and are going to be on future polls, I'm sure. So if you're really excited about any of those three, make sure to check out our Patreon where you can upvote those. But this one won, and it is kind of an unusual one. We've done a couple things like this before, where it's like more of a broad interpretation, not a direct adaptation. Yeah. But to me, it's all part of the umbrella of adaptation, and it's kind of cool to see one like this where it's like I haven't seen the movies. I actually don't know.
Oh, wow, really?
I have not seen it.
This movie's so interesting because it's like a modern reinterpretation of a Shakespeare story. But we've covered things like this. Like we did the Jane Austen adaptation with Clueless. And that was a bonus episode that was eventually released into the feed, which if you want to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/link-to-film, you get those episodes much sooner, if not years earlier than when they'll be in the main feed.
And the ability to vote on stuff like this, for sure.
Yeah. So thank you to the patrons. I'm really excited, and all these projects are something I'd like to cover. Yeah. But this one in particular, I never read this story, just seen the movie.
Yeah, I'd also never read or seen the play. I knew nothing about Taming of the Shrew. I'd heard the name. That is really, really it, and I've never seen the film. So we are going to cover the film next week. One of the things we do differently on our podcast is we like to dive into the source material and consider it on its own. So this week is going to be all about The Taming of the Shrew, this play that I'd never read until now. James, sounds like you as well. So I am definitely curious to know your thoughts on it. I wanted to also say we have covered Shakespeare before when we did Macbeth a few years ago now, I think it was. And we dived really deep into the biography of Shakespeare in that episode. So we're not going to redo that here. So if you want to hear more about Shakespeare, the playwright, and all of his bio and stuff, I would say check out our Macbeth episode for that.
Yeah, and we are experts on Shakespeare, obviously. We have been studying heavily our entire lives.
Yeah, my PhD is in Shakespeare. No, I really don't know a lot about him. And even in school, I only read a few plays. I think I read Hamlet.
Yep, Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet. I don't know, Richard the Eighth or what Fifth. What I don't even know. It shows how much I remember it.
We've got to touch in on Shakespeare with Station 11, which was awesome.
Oh, absolutely, and, important.
The importance of Shakespeare is not lost on us, and I think this story is really interesting because just to get into my reactions with it is I hold, like everyone does, William Shakespeare in high regard. There's a lot of interesting stories about whether he was one person or multiple, and we do kind of touch in on some of that with our Macbeth coverage.
Yeah.
But the legacy and the fact that he's the most adapted writer of all time in terms of something being made of his work.
I think it's safe to say he's the most famous author in the English language of all time.
So, and we are aware of that. We have read some of his work, not all of it, but I was shocked reading this story. I was I thought of William Shakespeare as someone who was quite clever and quite well in tune with, moralities and progressive ideals to an extent, obviously in his day and everything like that. And I do understand that William Shakespeare was in the business of writing comedies and tragedies. And so this has to fall within that parameter. I knew going in.
This is a comedy.
But reading the story, you could be is this a fucking tragedy? At times, obviously the interplay between those two, but at times in the story, I was just really not. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop and for me to really click in and really start engaging and loving this story.
Yeah.
And reading this was I mean, we went from Dracula, which was, you know, late 1800s, but into something much older, but into Shakespeare. So I thought, oh, timeless, some classic story of literature that's going to be really affect me and really show me this legacy. And I ended up walking away being like, I kind of hate this story. And I think that there's like maybe some arguments to be had as far as like him trying to play with his era and like you said, meant to be a comedy, I assumed. So trying to poke fun at it, but it didn't come off that way to me. So I don't know, I guess I'm kind of jumping the gun and just telling you how I feel about it right now, but I kind of walk away being like, this is absolutely the least engaged I've been with any of Shakespeare's material.
Yeah. Really interesting, man. I had a similar reaction to it. It really, in like looking into it and researching it more, it kind of helped me understand the interest in this play. Maybe the appeal, although it's debatable. And it helped me kind of frame it in my mind, because I agree. I was like very surprised by this play. We're going to do a plot synopsis, so don't worry if you're someone who like has no idea what this play is about, like I was going into it. We're going to go over that in a minute, and this will make a little more sense. But just here at the top, I do want to agree. This whole play has to do with, I mean, so the name of it's The Taming of the Shrew, and at its core, it's about a man taming a like shrewish woman who really is just like independent and like headstrong and, you know, like talks back to people. And it's all about just like basically emotionally abusing her and gaslighting her until she is tamed by him. That sounds pretty bad. And it is.
It's really bad. It's like domesticating like an animal almost. And she's spoken of in those terms a few times. Yes. in the story. And like that was it just kept rubbing me the wrong way, to the point that I'm like, I get that like it's of an era. It's all about like business as well. Like it's about like transactions and someone's worth.
Commerce is at the heart of this play in a lot of ways. It's a lot of the metaphors that get used, and we're dealing with marriage as if it is a business transaction between the men in this story.
Which historically, I think that was a thing, as far as like, you marry off your daughter and you give a calf or whatever, like give riches to the person who's marrying your daughter to continue your legacy, that kind of thing.
So let me give a little bit of context from what I was able to see at it. You know, I was only able to do so much research, but like this is a 1592 play. Everybody thinks there's a little bit of debate about when this actually was first performed, but that situates it at the beginning of Shakespeare's career. So this is a pretty early play for him, not the more mature artist we see like later in his career.
I mean, that's good to know. I didn't realize that. So maybe that's like a showing of growth.
Be something. There's also a couple other things. This is so long ago, again, 1592, that there is some debate that I could really only scratch the surface of over like what it is that we have still, and whether or not it's complete, and whether or not it's referring to something that was lost. Is this a revised version of an earlier play that now no longer exists? Like there's a lot of debate that I really could just kind of scratch the surface of, and so I don't know enough. If you know more, like, let us know in the comments. I'd be curious to hear. Like, are we sure this is the play as intended, as originally performed, or is this just like the one thing we have a record of? I don't know. It seems like there was some debate about that. But assuming that this is the play and the thing that he made, I think it's fair for us to engage with it as is, right? And so that's what we're going to do. And I was seeing, like, at the time, this was actually considered kind of progressive, because the husband in the scenario wasn't physically abusing his wife into submission.
Jesus,
and apparently there was a lot of plays at the time about that. And this was like presenting an alternative. Like, you could just use psychological manipulation to get your wife to obey you. So you know, whether how you feel about that, I saw that take out there. And then there's the other thing that I think is interesting to talk about, and we can talk about it as we go throughout this episode. There's a whole framing device for this play, and then there's this repeated thematic thing that comes up of one character pretending to be another character, and identity switching. There's a ton of identity switching going on, and people lying and masking and pretending to be people that they're not. And then there's the meta relationship of this being a play within a play, which we'll talk about how that is set up. And my question that I want for us to circle back to as we go is, like, does that change anything about the central message that this play seems to purport and how we should feel about it? and as we consider it going forward.
Having read some Shakespeare, I do understand like how rich his material is and how like ripe it is for interpretation. My initial reaction to it may be one that is short-sighted. Maybe there's a lot more digging that I need to do on repeat readings and like you said, looking online and like sort of looking into what scholars and people have said of the interpretation and placing it might give better context. But as a modern, I'm just trying to give my reaction first time as a modern reader. And like, yeah, to me, it's just like, especially knowing that this, I remember 10 Things I Hate About You pretty well. And I guess this is a great example of, I had no idea until we were doing a podcast that this was an adaptation of a Shakespeare work. And I think that's because of some of the changes that go into it and the way that it's played, at least from my memory, is played for like what maybe the play was attempting to do for that era, which is be lighthearted, kind of show a woman who's like powerful and finding an individual voice and all that kind of stuff. And like, I guess what I didn't see was that represented really in the characters in Shakespeare's story.
Sure.
And like the love story that develops, I think, in the movie feels like an actual love story, and this never felt like a love story to me.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
there's no romantic plot here that I felt drawn to in any way. In fact, and like you said, like, is this actually a tragedy? I've heard that, like, so this is a play that is often performed even today, but sometimes you'll see it performed sort of straight up as it reads, and then you'll see other times where people perform it as if it is a tragedy, or you'll see people turn it on its head in certain ways and make it out so that Katharina is actually like manipulating what's his name, Petruchio, the whole time.
Yeah, and that I can absolutely, like, I was trying to imagine while reading it someone performing it in today's day and age, and I just know that they've had so much fun twisting this story and turning it into something that is like more in keeping with our sort of what I think an audience going to a play would want to see in the modern era. And I can you saying that they're playing up her character to kind of be the main character and to be like in the background manipulating things and I don't know, making jokes at people's expense, that sort of thing is what I would have loved to have seen, like her sort of break away.
I don't know if they're adding lines. It's more probably just about like how you include it, how things are delivered.
Yeah,
right.
Emphasis.
Like, is it sarcastic? Because a big question at the end we'll get to is like her final monologue she has. Is it sarcastic or is it earnest?
Yeah, I didn't read it as sarcastic, but that's a great case in point of like that in a modern play, it playing very broad and very sarcastic would be pretty funny.
Yeah.
Because it is it's kind of scary because she seems like she's been like broken, lost her spirit or something like that, and that's like how it played to me when I was reading it.
Yeah. So we've touched on a lot of stuff, but we have to get into some of the specifics, I think, to like give this context. So I think I'm going to go ahead and move into talking about the framing device, because it's a very interesting part of this play that I want to talk about. So a lord comes across a drunken and comatose character named Christopher Sly and conceives the idea of bringing him back to his house and treating him as if he is a nobleman when he awakes to see what happens. The lord has his servants dress and act appropriately and convinces Sly that he has come to his senses after a long illness. A passing troupe of players perform a play for him, during which Sly gives an occasional bored reaction. Okay, so yes, there is a lord who comes across this character, Sly, who's like drunk and like a buffoon. And he's like, you know what would be funny, dude? We wash him and we have him wake up in my house and everybody is in on it. We all pretend like he's a lord and that he's just forgotten that he's a lord. And then there's this like troupe of actors and he's like, ooh, we're going to get this troupe of actors and they're going to come and put on a play for him. And then the play that gets put on is The Taming of the Shrew, that the rest of the play is. So, what did you think of this framing device? Like, why is this here, and what purpose does it serve in the narrative?
I found myself thinking about that device because it does play like a joke of the time period, and something that like somebody bored would manipulate and like prey on someone who's less fortunate in this way, and then like continue the joke. And I'm like, okay, that framing device, we get introduced to Katharina and Bianca soon after this. And I was trying to kind of like correlate what may have been happening. And I don't think it necessarily matches. So I am curious to hear your opinion on it too. But I was wondering if like, I have to keep relating it to the film because I've seen the film, but okay. You know how in like some teen movies, like high school teen movies, there's this person and there's this woman and like she's got her glasses on and her hair up and all this stuff, and they take it down and it's a totally different person. For some reason I was drawing like that, which I think that is sort of like a I don't know, maybe draws back to Shakespeare kind of trope as well. I don't know. For sure.
I don't know the origin of that, but yeah, that's the makeover trope that appears in a lot of stuff. Yeah.
And that doesn't happen in this film necessarily, but it felt in keeping with 10 Things I Hate About You. So I was like wondering if there's something to be drawn between the sort of transformation that they're trying to put Katharina through and some sort of like practical joke or some sort of like, you know, manipulation, or if this is meant to be viewed as like, this is like the game, the manipulation that all women in this society are having to go through.
So I think this thing is really interesting, and I think I want to believe that herein lies kind of the key to understanding this play as a little bit more interesting piece of work than it seemed on its surface. And I just keep coming back to it, and it's like I just look at the kind of the facts of it. It is about this man, Christopher Sly, who is being lied to, made to think that he is a noble. And it's played comedically, right? So like he wakes up and at first he's like, "What are you talking about? I'm not this." But then like everyone's treating him like he is, and so he's like, "Okay, I guess I am this." And so he's completely manipulated. And then he becomes the audience for the play that we are watching. So I'm thinking of it in, you know, Shakespearean era. You're putting on this play. You have this character who is now a stand-in for the audience themselves. And so I could maybe say like a sort of sly jab at the audience, right? Like it's like, is Shakespeare being sort of insulting to the audience in a sense of like, you know, this is you're this drunkard, and we're making you think you're a noble, and we're going to now put on a play for you. So there's maybe a little bit of that going on, like a skewering of the audience in a sense of like, I'm going to give you a play that you need to hear, or that you think you want to hear, or that you think would be appropriate.
Now that you're saying that, it does make me think like, okay, if we put ourselves in that context, then he has done the back end work to set up this idea that this could all be satire, and this could all be like a send up of the current era with, and just saying like this world that you're living in and the way that we're doing things is inherently ridiculous. And when you see this woman being, you know, emotionally tortured, I guess, emotionally manipulated, then you will see it as normal, but you're also
a drunkard who doesn't know
you're a drunkard, you're a fool. I like that.
And then I think there's also, I mean, like, it's notable that he comes in like halfway through, or actually like a third of the way through, and he's like been like falling asleep. He's not even really paying attention. They're like, "Come on, wake up, dude. You know, pay attention, buy in."
I like the meta nature of a Shakespeare. Like, he was playing with that in a very early era that was kind of ahead of its time, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's such a meta fun thing to do. Anytime that they had these like characters that would break out of the play itself and kind of address the crowd or anything like that.
Yeah, so I could see that being funny, right? And like you kind of laugh at yourself. But then I wished that there had been a little more. Like, it felt to me like this needed one more beat. And I was particularly thinking of at the end. Maybe it's not the final thing, but like towards the end, we needed to return to Christopher Sly and see what effect this play has had on him. What lesson has he learned? How has it changed his perception of this joke that's being played on him? Is he aware of things now, or is he still completely unaware? I don't know. And it's never addressed. We don't return to it. It's left to me as just kind of a dangling thread. And assuming that it wasn't like lost to time or something, I just think that it's like it was like maybe the beginning of something interesting that for whatever reason was never fully realized. Because isn't there something like inherently kind of there's a tension between the idea that the audience member who is watching this play is being lied to about his identity, and then the play that we're putting on, every single character is lying about their identity.
Yeah, they're all in disguise. Yeah. They're all different people, and people are. So there's like one character is in disguise and has like his servant or his butler or somebody that works for him that is like dressed up as him and is convincing this woman to marry him.
Yeah,
and so like he's not even effectively like courting this woman. His like, you know, underling is, and
we're about to describe that, and I'll do my best to kind of see what we're talking about here. But like I don't know, this layers of identity thing, it seems like some sort of point is trying to be made, and like maybe I'm just missing it, but like I wasn't seeing people online being able to like truly link the two, like other than just saying that like there seems to be a link, thematic or otherwise. So we can consider that more going forward, but I think it's important to put everything in the context of this meta narrative that's going on. So the play begins with Lucentio arriving in Padua to study. So Padua is this like Italian, I think, city or province where this all takes place. As soon as he sees Bianca, the younger daughter of the rich merchant Baptista, he falls in love with her. Bianca is also being wooed by Gremio and Hortensio, but Baptista will not allow her to be married until a husband is found for his older daughter, Caterina, the Shrew, whose aggressive character has made this unlikely. Gremio and Hortensio decide to join forces and find a husband for Caterina. Lucentio changes identities with his servant Tranio and gets a job as Bianca's tutor in order to get close to her. Petruchio of Verona is visiting Hortensio and agrees to help his friend by marrying Caterina, especially when he learns of the size of her dowry. At his first meeting with her, he takes no argument from her and insists on marrying her despite her angry protestations. Baptista willingly agrees, leaving Bianca's suitors to argue for their respective cases among themselves. Lucentio makes progress with Bianca in his guise as tutor. So there's kind of these two main narratives going on. And the first is the most like kind of ludicrous and like silly of them. And that's these three suitors who are all changing their identities. And like you said, this lord, he's like pretending to be a tutor now, but then he has his assistant or his like servant pretend to be him. And so he like tries to court him as the lord he's impersonating, while the lord he's impersonating is actually the tutor, who is lying about being a tutor just so that he can like have a secret meeting with her. And like, She seems kind of fine with all of this and just kind of plays along. And I will say, like, there's a lot of really witty back and forth. There's a lot of wordplay and, like it's all language that you would expect from Shakespeare. It's very clever. And I think that especially his comedies seem to have this really like just sharp back and forth between characters that is fascinating to read. So at the very least, this was all pretty entertaining. And then you put it all in that larger context of the meta narrative. I think it's particularly interesting.
Yeah, I found myself, because of the similarities, and that's just because maybe I'm not used to reading Italian words, but the similarities of characters' names in the story were quite
hard to track.
I eventually clicked in, but it was like the EOs, all the EOs.
Well, and it doesn't help that they're all pretending to be each other and different characters and stuff with different names.
Exactly.
I think maybe it's even being like, I have a feeling like if you were of the day watching this, you wouldn't even be able to track who all is who.
And like, is that intentional, right?
I
like,
think
is that a joke kind of in itself of like, you're all the same, or some commentary of some kind?
Yeah, that reminds me. Before I forget about it, one other thing I saw pointed out is that at this time it was illegal, or I don't know if it was actually illegal or just it wasn't done, but for women to perform in plays. So all of the roles of the women, including Caterina and Bianca, would have been played by men, dressed in like drag, essentially. So that adds another layer when we get to the speech at the end. The person who's giving it is actually a man in women's clothing pretending to be a woman. And like, could Shakespeare have been like aware of that in a meta way?
Yeah, of the patriarchy, like kind of
asserting
spouting off their ideals.
Like, are you not supposed to perceive this as Caterina, but as the actor portraying Caterina, who is actually a man,
and how a woman should be behaving, kind of thing, like a man saying how a woman should be behaving in that role. Yeah.
So let's look at this. What it brings up though with Petruchio. So Petruchio, like, he basically is like, I'm here to marry somebody rich, and he hears about this dowry, and he's like, I'll tame her. Don't you worry, I'll take this one on. Yeah.
Terrible character.
He's bad.
There's a few things along the way where it's like, I don't know what I thought the title, The Taming of the Shrew, was about.
Yeah.
But when I learned about it, I was like, oh, I inherently, like, the conceit of this entire story sucks. Like, I don't like this. I'm trying to do my best to place it within the context of possible Shakespeare commentary and everything like that, things that I hadn't thought of. But yeah, this character comes in and he's immediately like insulting Caterina, telling her that he's going to marry her, period. All because the first thing we learn about him is that he's like, I want to find a rich woman to marry, and finds about her dowry and all that stuff. And her dad is basically like, I'm a merchant, so absolutely. He's like, I'm trying to make deals. And I don't know.
It's all very transactional.
A lot of business talk, I think, was brought up, and the idea of shipping.
Yeah,
ports.
I mean, he's like, I'm going to marry her. He has never even met her at that point, but it's just for the dowry.
I do think it's funny that like one of them was like training or like a tutor of some kind in music, and the other was in what
Latin,
was it again?
I think it was Latin.
Oh yeah, in Latin. Assuming that they weren't experts in that field, the idea of them trying to come in and then like fake it.
Yeah.
To tutor her is kind of funny, I guess.
Yeah, it was all very farcical. They seem like fools. And there's 3 of them all kind of jabbing at each other and competing for her attention. So it's like this whole plot is going on, but then we also get the Petruchio plot where he meets her for the first time and he kind of informs her what's going down, and they have this like sparring back and forth where she shows off her shrewish, weird term, her shrewish ways. And everyone's like, see, like, I don't know how you're going to be able to put up with this. And he's like, oh, well, I'll be fine.
And they're all like so impressed. And they're like, this is a man here. Like, this guy is to be applauded, basically. And like, they're all so excited about the fact that he's going to do this.
Yeah. Well, because they want to get with Bianca too. And they know that they can't unless he does this. And in fact, they all are kind of like behind their like backs being like, oh my God, I can't believe he's going to do this, but good for him. You know, like he'll help us out. It's bizarre. I mean, this is the setup for the play. It sounds really weird, but like this is it. So let me get into the final, bit of plot here, and then we can talk about it as a whole. So Petruchio arrives late for his wedding, badly dressed, and behaves badly during the service, and afterwards he refuses to stay for the reception, despite Katerina's wishes to the contrary. He takes her back to his country house, where he refuses to let her eat, sleep, or dress, while she conforms to his every whim. Hortensio and Gremio see Bianca courting the tutor Lucentio and decide in disgust to court her no longer. Hortensio decides to marry a rich widow. Tranio persuades a passing schoolmaster to play the part of Lucentio's father, Vincentio, and confirm to Baptista that Lucentio is a wealthy background. Lucentio elopes with Bianca and they are married. On their way back to Padua, Caterina and Petruchio meet the real Vincentio. They arrive at Lucentio's house, but the schoolmaster and Tranio refuse to acknowledge them, calling him a villain. The real Vincentio is about to be taken off to prison when Lucentio arrives, revealing his marriage, and the identity changes. The parents accept this situation. Okay. At the combined wedding reception of Petruchio, Lucentio, and Hortensio, the 3 husbands wager among themselves which of their wives, in another room, will be the most obedient and come at their bidding. Caterina, now a changed person, is the only one to do so. She remonstrates the other women, lecturing them on the merits of wifely obedience. And that's the end of the play. If that's hard to track, then yes, it is, because I think it's so convoluted, and there's so many people playing other people, and like it gets so out of control. I think that's the point, right? I don't know how much you're supposed to be really able to follow this, or like if you can, it's still comedic, just how ludicrous it's gotten.
Yeah, I feel like I tried really hard to track it, so yeah. I think like I figured out kind of who was who and why it was happening, but I didn't see the point. I think is ultimately what and again, maybe that's my ignorance, maybe that's I need to do another reading in a new context, but by the end I was totally expecting her to come out and have some sort of speech about how you shouldn't be this kind of woman, and you should, but like knowing what she had gone through, where he like
let's talk about that a little bit more, because I think that's an interesting part to highlight. So he takes her to his country home, and he basically has all of his servants like play into this. He has, again, which plays into the meta narrative a little bit. All of his servants are all sort of in on it. And what he does is he'll like have them deliver a meal, and then he'll come in and be like, he'll taste it and he'll be like, this meal is burnt. It's inedible. Throw it all away. And he'll like, tip the table over and say, you can't eat any of this. I won't allow it. Yeah. Your tastes are too good for this.
Gaslighting her while nothing is wrong with the food.
Nothing's wrong with the food. She's like, I thought it was fine. He's like, no, nothing but the best for you. And then the same thing with the dress. He's like, no, it's not good enough. Look at it. It's not like perfectly made. And she's like, I like it. And he's like, no, it's terrible. And he's, he like scolds the tailor for making it the way that he does. And then he's like waking her up all hours of the night. I forget what his like reason for that is. It's like he can't get, like he wants her to be more comfortable or something. It's all, around this idea of like nothing is good enough for her. So he wants to make it even better. But in so doing, he's keeping her from being able to sleep. So she's basically just being tortured. Psychologically and emotionally by this guy.
Just completely gaslit all the way across.
And she's isolated in his house. Like she has nobody that she knows there to help her.
And the dress specifically stands out to me as like she really wanted the dress. Like it was this beautiful dress that she was so drawn to, and she felt like it was perfect in every way. And he's like freaking out on this tailor, embarrassing her, and like all of that. So and then at some point she gets the trauma of this, I guess, gets to the point where she won't step out anymore.
Yeah, she realizes like if I just go along with what he says, then he stops. And then we even get some like asides from him being like, if anybody else knows a better way to tame a shrew, then you tell me, because I found the way. It's very gross.
It sucks, man.
And then the crown of all of that is they're like on their way back, and they're in a carriage, and he has this whole thing where he like the sun's out, and she's like, oh, the sun, and he's like, no, it's the moon. She's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, it's the moon. She's like, no, it's the sun. And then he's like, we're gonna turn around and go back unless you say it's the moon. And so she's like, okay, I guess it's the moon. Like, it's like this bizarre, like, just complete gaslighting. He has to, like, assert complete control over her to where she's denying the existence of the sun. To me, this is all so absurd and, like, inherently domineering and, like, villainous behavior that I struggle to think that Shakespeare actually thought this guy was going to be someone people were going to like and think that this was a good thing. It does seem hard to believe that that's the case, but maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know.
No, I agree with you. I think that's the case. It's so over the top, but the messaging doesn't follow through for like, there's no comeuppance. There's no, like, a comedic ending would be, something happens to this person or something, and that doesn't come. And maybe there's a subversion happening here. Maybe that's the point, is like, it's absurdist comedy rather than sort of like make you laugh out loud comedy.
I want something at the end, because I said like at the end is this final test that he puts on, which is like the worst fucking test you can imagine. These three guys being in a room being like, call your wife and see if she comes. Whoever's wife comes wins the battle of who has the best wife. And it's so gross. And she comes in because she's been completely manipulated by him, and then she gives this like long speech talking about like wifely duties and how you have to obey men, and they're out there like fighting for you, and your job is to be like tender and soft and weak for them so that they can be strong and all this stuff. And it's like, you listen to it and you're like, well, this is all gross. And then that's the end of the play, and that's the thing that shocked me most. I was like, what happened to the meta narrative?
Yeah,
because I wanted to see like, what did this all mean to this Sly character, and does he find out that he's being lied to? You assume at some point. So why didn't we get shown that? Why include the meta narrative at all if you're not going to pay it off? So I don't know. And like, I guess some people have put on like a final scene where they do return to the character of Sly. Some different troops have included that. I don't know how it was written, if like everybody's writing their own version of it, or if there's like a famous version that people have adopted maybe over time. But that does feel like it just feels like a strange place to end. And some people have read that final speech as being sarcastic. Is Katerina, if you're to assume she's just doing this to please her husband, can you hear all of that as like it's all loaded with sarcasm of like, none of this is true.
Totally. But like what she's gone to me as a modern reader, what she's gone through, and then that speech at the end doesn't play to me as sarcastic. It didn't come out that way.
Sure.
But I do want to note something too that I like that you're talking about, is like the idea of troops taking and changing this story. I think theater culture, like I wish I was more immersed in it growing up. Like I did a couple of like camps, like theater camps and stuff, but I know a lot of people who were involved in it. And like the idea of someone interpreting the work and changing it, and specifically Shakespeare, right? Like Shakespeare's work is so popular to be acted in school plays and all the way up to, the Royal Shakespeare Company. And the idea of, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but the idea of having a story that's kind of ambivalent or like sort of ambiguous, and then leaving room for interpretation, and specifically what we're going to get to in adaptation, something like, if you're going to try to adapt Macbeth, that's a massive undertaking. Everyone lauds it as one of the greatest stories ever, with so much richness and subtext. This is a story by Shakespeare, and this is my interpretation of all of this. This is a story by Shakespeare that doesn't have quite so much of that, but it does leave open ends. And if there's something that's ripe to be adapted and changed and made anew, I think this story makes so much sense to adapt.
Yeah.
And it'll be like, when we get to the film, it'll be really interesting to kind of compare some of those elements and see if we like the idea of this being adapted as like a teenage sort of rom-com.
I'm really curious to see what it's like, man. But circling back to the play itself, one thing I wanted to point out, and I saw this echoed elsewhere, is that Shakespeare is known for interesting women characters in his plays who are very smart, who are, in fact, like society underestimates them frequently to their own detriment. And a lot of characters like Petruchio, who are like terrible men, things don't tend to work out well for them. And it's either like a tragic flaw in their character, is that they're unable to like see women or their wives as like, equal people, or they're just straight up villains.
And maybe that's the expectations of the story that are playing with me and that are kind of throwing me off, because that's what I assumed coming into the story, and that's kind of what I've experienced with Shakespeare, is that like if someone seems like a villain in a story, even to modern sensibilities or past sensibilities, they're probably the villain. And in this story, that's not necessarily the case. And maybe it's some combination of this being an early work for him and also there being some commentary that I'm missing.
Yeah. And that's where I am also like, I want to leave space for that too, right? Because assuming he was just one man, which it seems like is likely the case, people grow throughout their lives. And maybe when he was a young man, he had a different view on the relationship between men and women than he came to have. And then there's also the chance that like he was really trying to highlight the fucked up nature of this transactional marriage and this patriarchal society that he participated in. And this was a way he felt like he could do it without like ruffling too many feathers. Maybe he wasn't like famous enough and established enough to feel like he could really go hard. So he included this Christopher Sly character, and he included some layers of meta where he gets everybody laughing about it, everybody talking about it. I don't know. It's like, it's really hard. I mean, we're hundreds and hundreds of years later to to know what's really going on. I'm bringing a lot of my modern sensibilities to even imagine what life was like for someone in 1592 is like damn near impossible. So who even knows?
Maybe it was a safety thing for him or whatever. Maybe he felt like he couldn't tell the story that he really wanted to. And if that's the case, then I have more respect for the story than I thought. But it's like
I want to say I don't know that. It's just purely speculation.
Yeah. Whether or not I think as a modern reader it went far enough, he was at least engaging with something that I think he was seeing as a problem. Because there are areas, whether or not the ending kind of lands for us, there are areas in the story where it's clear that he is poking fun at the nature of the transactional marriages and arranged marriages and all that kind of thing, and how absurd that is, and how there's no love element in any of this. It's just all for power or money, and the women are just kind of left in that churn that like the men are creating in their lives. And I think that it's at least engaged with to where you can see that like a woman may see something in this story that's like powerful and empowering in a sense, other than the ending is what I would say.
Yeah.
And then a man watching it may have a question about how they do things and maybe start to think about.
Yeah, because maybe like he expected it to be so obvious that this was a bad thing that like if you're in the audience watching it and you're hearing the speech, you're like feeling like Katerina has been dominated into saying this. So like, should we expect this from women? So I wanted to read. Like, I am not an actor. I am very new to this. I'm not particularly good at reading Shakespeare. But I want to read a little bit. We have some time, so I wanted to give. This is the final speech that Katerina gives. So I think this is good context for people who have not read this, right? And they're just curious, like what it's about. And they're like, I'm probably not ever going to read this. You might want to hear so you can kind of understand what we're talking about. So the question about this is it given completely earnestly because she's everything considering the situation, or is she coming out and giving it in some sort of sarcastic way?
Well, I am excited to sit back and interpret your performance here and see what lean you're going to give to it. Are you going to give it sarcastic?
I'll say that it'll be a inelegant one, whatever. So here we go. Thy husband is thy lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign, one that cares for thee, and for thy maintenance commits his body to painful labor, both by sea and land, to watch the night in storms, the day in cold, whilst thou liest warm at home, secure and safe, and craves no other tribute at thy hands but love, fair looks, and true obedience. Too little payment for so great a debt. Such duty as the subject owes the prince, even such a woman oweth her husband. And when she is froward, peevish, sullen, sour, and no obedient to his honest will, what is she but a foul contending rebel, and graceless traitor to her loving lord? I'm ashamed that women are so simple to offer war where they should kneel for peace, or seek for rule, supremacy, and sway when they are bound to serve, love, and obey? Why are bodies soft and weak and smooth, unapt to toil and trouble in the world, but that our soft conditions and our hearts should well agree with our external parts? On its surface, that seems just like this straight up, like, women are made to serve their husbands as if they are lords. But you have to put it into the context of how she got to this point, who she was before, and how she's here. Now, is this just proof that she's been tamed? Or is it proof that she's been basically tortured into saying this? And then you add that extra layer of Christopher Sly, the supposed audience member, who is himself being lied to. And so, like, what are we supposed to take from that? I definitely would like to hear people's thoughts in the comments. Like, do you think there's anything to this idea of the meta narrative, and does it change anything about it for you? Or is it just kind of there as, like, I don't know, people call it like a Greek chorus. Is he just there to, like, provide a little bit of a fun aside and, like, a way to, like, feel like this? Isn't it cool that it's a play within a play? Like, is that all it really is? And it doesn't actually serve any purpose beyond that. And this is just a straight up story about, you know, a man emotionally abusing his wife into submission, I guess.
I just can't imagine that's something, that's the kind of story that people were very interested in. We are interested to hear your takes on it, though. I will give more of my general thoughts on that there. This is a story written by someone who would go on to be known as, like, one of the greatest writers of all time, if not the greatest writer. So to me, it just feels like there's got to be more to it. There's more substance. There's more layers. This great chorus that's absolutely there as a layer, but also, like, you don't put something like that framing element into a story and not have it mean something, especially in this era.
Yeah, I like to think so. And, like, even just reading that now, it goes so far. Like, multiple times it's like, your husband is your lord, and how dare you stand up to him, and how dare you ever, like, question him and, like, not yield, and, like, all this stuff. It's like, I don't know. I struggle to believe that was supposed to be taken at face value. I think we're supposed to be seeing something tragic here. So maybe the people who, like, give this as, like, a tragic playing, and, like, we're supposed to just feel really bad for Katerina and the situation she's in. Like, I can see elements of that.
That's what I said at the beginning, is, like, I almost kind of read it as a tragedy at the end. And I also wonder, as a writer, if Shakespeare wasn't playing with this idea of, I'm being forced into the box of writing tragedies and comedies. And he's like, what does it look like if I write both?
Yeah.
Maybe it is played straight, and maybe it is an experimentation by a writer who's trying to...
You're saying this was an early dramedy?
maybe.
Yeah. What is it? A comedy like The Bear is a comedy.
Sure. Yeah.
Did you hear about that? The controversy around that? The Bear got nominated as a comedy in the
Golden Globes. It always happens. You remember that The Martian won for best comedy the year that it was nominated, right? The Martian.
Yeah,
a sci-fi story. Like, there are comedic elements.
There are comedic elements, and the same thing could be said for The Bear. There are comedic elements, but, like, overall, that show is much more of a drama than it is a comedy. But yeah, I think dramedy is always a weird spot where it's like people don't really know what to make of it, and maybe that is something going on here of, like, I'm gonna call this a comedy, I'm gonna play it for laughs, I'm gonna have this drunk, and we're all gonna laugh at how ridiculous it is. But I want you to be uncomfortable at the end, maybe? You know, maybe like an early sense of, like, I really want you to be uncomfortable by what happens and, like, maybe questioning yourself. Like, do I feel like this was ultimately a good thing? Is it a good thing that our society does this? Maybe. And again, maybe I'm giving him too much credit and he actually doesn't deserve it. And that's definitely possible too. It's just me trying to square the circle for, like, I did not expect a play like this from Shakespeare. You know, I really did not expect going into this that it was on its surface going to be something that I was so against. You know, I thought, because, like, I don't know. I mean, this is obvious to say, but, like, I like interesting, intelligent people. I want to be around interesting, intelligent people who are independent and have strong personalities and strong thoughts and challenge people and don't just, like, kind of get run over. Like, I like being around people like that. I like talking to people like that. I like being in a relationship with someone like that. Like, the idea that you need to tame them and change them and break them down to being this subservient, meek, like, person who will never challenge you is so inherently disgusting to me as a person, and, like, just pathetic and sad, and, like, it's something I'm just so not interested in.
It reminds me of some of the things that we're seeing in the country with, like, people pushing for, like, typical gender roles and, like,
the whole, like, trad wife movement and stuff. Yeah.
And, like, I've always been the kind of person that was drawn to, like, strong-willed women that, like, I want somebody who
that makes sense that you're with my sister.
Yeah, right. Who challenges
knowing her, that makes sense.
Yeah, it challenges my worldviews, and then also just like is a companion. It's
more interesting to like share a life with someone like that. It just
absolutely,
is.
Yeah, it is. And like I know people, they think of that as strange, and I like it kind of blows my mind, and I can see that in the story. Now we're talking about a story that's from like 400 years ago or more, and in that way, like that was the norm of the time, of course. But like we were talking about Shakespeare and talking about how he liked strong women in his stories. Like there are many, and to
about
point to one,
Lady Macbeth.
Think about Macbeth.
Like,
exactly. Yeah. Lady Macbeth is running things in that story, and she is making the calls, and like that. It just doesn't like that. This author would be short-sighted earlier in his career, maybe. But more to me, gotta be engaging with the kind of grossness of these like arranged marriages and marriages for profit or whatever.
And I think it's very fair to look at it and say, like, if he is doing that, he doesn't do it particularly effectively. He's not doing it in a way that has like transcended time to where we can all look at it now and say, oh, that's what he's doing. Because like a lot of the evidence, we're trying to find it here, but it's not all like inherent to the project at hand. Now, let us know if you disagree. But I think that's about as far as we can go with this play. It was a lot of fun. I had the I had an ebook version of it. I also listened to an audio production of it because I find that I like to hear how it's. I know that's like kind of an adaptation, especially when you get a play, but there's no visual. So I just wanted to hear, and it was word for word. So I wanted to hear how the lines are delivered, because when we're talking about language that old, sometimes like I need to hear the intonation to like understand. And I know that those are choices, but still it helps me to follow along. So I thought that was a cool way to read it. So like if you're someone who like me hasn't read Shakespeare since we were in school, I mean, I did Macbeth, but you know what I mean? Other than that, like that's a cool way to get back into it, because just picking up a play and being like, I'm just going to read this thing, I find that very difficult to do. And that was a cool way for me to get into it.
I listened to it as well. And like, I have a physical copy that I was reading through at the same time. And like, to me, it's like, I appreciate maybe some of the emphasis that's put on it. And I assume that people who are directing these productions, or they have some level of experience with Shakespeare that like, maybe I don't. It's got to be the most studied, one of the most studied authors, one of the most studied works. Maybe this isn't.
Absolutely.
And I will say, like, I'm now saying that like there's more to the story than I initially thought. It still doesn't jump up the list in Shakespeare.
I saw a lot of people out there saying this is their least favorite Shakespeare play.
I'm going to go on record and say that as well. That's what I was getting at, is like, while I think that there are more layers to it than maybe on initial reading I picked up on, I still don't really like the story. I think that there, like, maybe there's a piece missing.
Because it feels like we're supposed to be laughing, and like we're on their side, on these gross guys' side. We're supposed to all be laughing about this woman and what's happened to her, and it's just like, I don't know. It just feels gross.
Yeah. It doesn't really land. But like I said before, I think one of the major things about that is it's begging for change, begging for adaptation.
Yeah. And so next week we will be tackling 10 Things I Hate About You, which is like the ultimate goal. I think a lot of people who voted for that were probably excited about the film, and I've never seen it, so I know was it Heath Ledger is in it, so I'm excited to see that. You know, he's someone we tackled with A Knight's Tale not too long ago. It was really fun to see him.
It's kind of cool that we're going back to Heath Ledger. Like it felt not very long ago that we talked about A Knight's Tale. So excited to talk about him again.
So if you enjoyed this episode, definitely weigh in the comments. This is one where I'd be really interested to hear what I know. People know a lot more about Shakespeare than me. Like I'm not pretending like I'm some sort of expert, so I want to hear from people who know more, or even just your thoughts on what we said. Let us know in the comments, or send us an email. You're always welcome to do that. Oh, if you wanted to join our Discord, let us know. We'll send you a link, and you can hop in our Discord where we can have conversations about that kind of stuff. It's pretty small right now, but a little community that we're trying to grow, and just have kind of open conversations about adaptations, which is just fun for us. So I'm always excited to do. And if you like this video, let us know in another way by liking, subscribing. If you're on another platform, make sure to leave us a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on, because that helps us get the word out.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. We're all over the place. All of those at Ink to Film.
And one more time, if you would like to vote on future projects, or you would like to listen to our bonus episodes, by the time you listen to this, we will have an episode on the 1922 version of Nosferatu that should be out on Patreon. Patreon.com/inktofilm. We'd love to have your support over there. It does so much to help us keep going. All right, man. So that's it for our revisit to Shakespeare. This was definitely an interesting one. Let us know if there's another Shakespeare you'd like for us to tackle, because there's so many adaptations that have been made. There's definitely other ones we could do. Where should we go next? Now we've done Macbeth and The Taming of the Shrew, like two very, very different plays.
And I like that our patrons like had us read this, because like while I didn't love the story, I like having the context now, and I like bringing this into the
whole different side of Shakespeare, right?
Totally.
Yeah. All right, so that's gonna be it for this week. So until next time,
keep adapting.